Hello, and welcome back to the Second and Short College Football Show. Last weekend, the college football regular season concluded, and we got our fifth straight week to end the season with two top 10 teams going down. To begin this new era of the expanded playoff, we have had one of the most chaotic college football seasons in history, and the best part is, it's nowhere close to over. Feels like it's been a little while since I was back here with you guys on the College Football Show. It's been 2 weeks because last week with Thanksgiving, we didn't do an episode. We instead did our College Football Rivalry Week preview and my final picks of the year on our Second and Short live stream last Wednesday. Little update on the picks in case you didn't catch the live stream. We ended up having a bounce back for our final week of picks. We went 2-1. That brought us on the season to 19-17, and that is where we will end. I'm glad we finished above 500. Still not happy about how the last couple weeks of the season went, but expect that next year we're coming back stronger. But for now, we have one of the most consequential conference championship weekends in the history of college football to look forward to. With that being said, let's talk a little bit about what the College Football Show is going to look like today and what we'll see down the road. For starters, there will be no College Football Show next week. If you'd like to hear our reactions to the College Football Playoff Selection Show, listen to Monday's episode of the podcast next week. After that, there will be one last episode of the College Football Show. Right now, I think the best time to run that is going to be between the first round and the quarterfinals. That episode would give me a chance to talk about how the home games went, the first ever College Football Playoff home games. Then that'll give us a chance to look at how some of these routes look for some of those winners in the first round and how their path looks to potentially winning a College Football Playoff National Championship. So in the meantime, make sure that you're subscribed and turn on post notifications here on YouTube so you know when that video goes up, as well as anything else that we've got going up in the meantime. Also, follow us on Instagram to stay up to date with everything we've got going on across all of our Second and Short channels. Finally, make sure you listen to the podcast every Monday and Friday. The episodes go up at 6 a.m. on YouTube and 2 a.m. on the podcast platforms. First, we're going to talk about what these brand new College Football Playoff rankings look like. Then we'll briefly look at the playoff picture as it stands. That will be followed by our group of 5 predictions for the conference championships. Then I will give my predictions for all the Power 4 conference championships. And finally, I'm going to talk through what I think the College Football Playoff rankings and the College Football Playoff picture is going to look like after conference championship weekend has concluded. So without further ado, let's talk about the brand new College Football Playoff rankings. I've got the rankings up here on the side of the screen so you guys can see them. Typically, we would just go through the first couple teams out and then talk about the teams in the top 12. But this week, there's a couple of teams pretty far outside of what looks like the playoff picture that are still very much in contention for a spot. That starts with number 20, UNLV, who's going to be taking on Boise State in the Mountain West Championship game. UNLV has an incredible chance to actually make the playoff here because if they were to beat Boise, that would move Boise out of the top 12 almost definitely, and they would then be most likely the 5th highest ranked conference champion. Then we move to 17, 16, and 15. We've got Clemson, Iowa State, and Arizona State. There's the potential that out of these 3 teams, 2 of them make the college football playoff. Clemson will be playing in the ACC championship game against SMU. Then Arizona State and Iowa State are going head-to-head in the Big 12 championship game, and the winner of that, because of how the rankings look right now, is definitely getting in as that 12 seed or potentially could get in as the 4 seed with a Boise State loss. Then at 14, you have a South Carolina team that just got a great win against Clemson. It was a close game, but still a huge top 25 win for South Carolina to end off their season. And then right ahead of them is an Ole Miss team that beat them head-to-head. But with that Florida loss from 2 weeks ago, this 3-loss Ole Miss team doesn't really seem to have a legitimate shot at still getting into the playoff, barring some miracle work. And at number 12, we have Miami, who took their 2nd loss of the season, this time against Syracuse, and it proved costly. It kicked them out of contention for the ACC championship, and now they sit on the outside looking in, even at the 12 seed, because of where the Big 12's representatives lie. And because of how this has gone, Miami has a very slim chance of still making it to the college football playoff. At number 11, you've got Alabama, and Miami's rankings have certainly caused a bit of discourse, but Ward Manuel came out and said exactly why Alabama's ahead of them, and it comes down to the strength of record to this point. Alabama has beaten more 500 teams. Alabama has beaten more top 25 teams. Then at number 10 is Boise State, who has just continued to kind of do what they need to do to get wins, but maybe not in the most impressive fashion. They're still winning games. They're still leading their conference, and they have a shot at securing potentially the number 4 seed. Then at number 9 is Indiana, and with this ranking, they're almost a shoo-in to make the playoff because of the fact that they aren't playing in the Big Ten Championship. They have one loss this season. It's to an Ohio State team that is ranked above them. And outside of that, you can't necessarily hold a lot of things against them outside of strength of schedule. They did exactly what they needed to in rivalry week, which was put a smackdown on Purdue. And now they just kind of leave it up to the rest of the nation. But as it stands right now, Indiana has a fantastic chance to make the college football playoff. Now we get to a team in SMU at number 8 who is in a particularly interesting spot compared to most teams ahead of them and some of the ones behind them. SMU is going to play for the ACC championship game. Their opponent is number 17 Clemson. If SMU loses this game, it will only be their second loss of the season. And if they lose it by a slim margin, if they play a regular game with Clemson and it stays very close, but they come out with a loss, there is still a chance that SMU has the resume to stay inside of the top 12 and get a playoff spot. After SMU, you've got Tennessee here coming in at 7. They will not be taking part in the SEC championship game. And now Tennessee just has to sit around and wait, just like a number of other teams here within the top 10. Then at number 6 is another team that will not be taking part in their conference championship game. It's number 6, Ohio State. Ohio State suffered a horrible loss to rivals Michigan in the game this past weekend, and it was madness. It has come to the point where we're talking about Ryan Day getting fired. We're talking about who is to trust here for Ohio State. Can they turn things around after a bad loss to their rival and still make a run at the national championship? Then at number 5 is Georgia. They are going to play against Texas in the SEC championship game, and Georgia has everything here to win. You don't necessarily want to have a third loss because, yes, you will drop in the rankings, of course, but I'd be interested to see how the committee will react to Georgia if they do get a third loss here on the season, because they'd be losing to a Texas team that they beat prior by 15 points, and now Georgia is a 3-loss team, but they'd still played in their conference championship game. They still have the head-to-head over Tennessee. I'd be very interested to see what the playoff committee does in that event. At number 4, you have Notre Dame, who just kind of gets lucky and slithers up here to the top. Obviously, they can't get one of the top 4 seeds in the playoffs, so right now they would automatically move to number 5. There's a weird world where ahead of them is Penn State and Oregon, and those two teams with a close loss could just keep Notre Dame right where they are, and Notre Dame could realistically end up getting the 6th seed. I'm still not too sure what Notre Dame's resume really looks like when it's said and done. What do they really have over some of these top teams with maybe one more loss than them? But they've done what they could with the schedule they have. They've won their games, but unfortunately, they don't play in a conference, and they don't get the benefit of winning a conference championship. Then your top 3 goes as follows. You got Penn State coming in at 3. They'll be playing in that Big Ten championship game with the loss that Ohio State suffered this past weekend. Then you got number 2, Texas. They slide up with that drop for Ohio State. They will take on Georgia after a win over Texas A&M last week. Then at number 1, like they have been for a number of weeks now, for a majority of the season, I believe at this point, the Oregon Ducks are the number 1 team in the nation as we head into their conference championship matchup against Penn State. All right, enough of the rankings. Now it is time to look at what the playoff picture would really look like based on the seeding. In this playoff picture, we obviously assume that the conference champion is whichever team is the higher ranked opponent in that matchup. One thing that this doesn't really account for is how the committee would see these losses and how that would drop teams and how they would move around others. So keep that in mind when looking at these playoff pictures, is that they might not necessarily reflect how things would go if all the top seeds won their conference championship. So obviously all that looks fine and good, but the games this weekend are huge for how this will really look come next week. So why don't we go ahead and start with the Group of 5 conference championship games. The Group of 5 conference championship games really only have one that has playoff implications, but these are certainly some good matchups that cannot be slept on. I also love the fact that a couple of these are being played on Friday, which gives us a chance to put some spotlight on some teams that maybe haven't gotten their appreciation yet this season. The way we're going to go through the group of 5 championships is just by order of importance. Let's be honest, like I said, there's not a lot of important stuff to be here for, so if you'd like to hear about Boise State UNLV, which is obviously the biggest one, that's going to be at the end of this segment. But we're going to start with the MAC championship game. We've got the Ohio Bobcats taking on Miami of Ohio. This one being played indoors at Ford Field. And I got to be honest, Ohio has been quietly a great team this season. But earlier in the year, one of their 3 losses this year was to Miami in a 30-20 loss. But Ohio's only other 2 losses were to a Syracuse team who is now a top 25 team and a Kentucky team who, despite being 4-8 this season and having quite a bad year, upset Ole Miss and gave Georgia quite a fit the week before they went and beat Ohio. So I really do think this is going to be a great game. We're going to get some classic Maction moments, of course, but I'm going to take Ohio. I'm loving what they did this season, and I got to go on their side. Then we've got the Conference USA Championship between Western Carolina and Jacksonville State. If you caught the live stream last Wednesday or 2 weeks ago you watched the college football show, you would know that the Conference USA had a very interesting conclusion because of how the schedule panned out. The top 4 teams going into the final 2 weeks of the season all played each other in those 2 weeks. And just last week, Western Kentucky took on Jacksonville State in a game where Jacksonville State had already clinched their spot in the championship game, and Western Kentucky needed a win to go over Sam Houston State and Liberty. And Western Kentucky did it. They got a win by 2 points against Jacksonville State, and now they get to take them on just 1 week later. And I will say I've got a lot of love for the Hilltoppers, but what Jacksonville State has done this year has been honestly incredible. They have been a fantastic team all season, and I think you can kind of brush past what happened last week. They knew they were in, and they didn't necessarily care who they played, but let's be honest, they got the exact scouting report they wanted to out of Western Kentucky last week, and they know exactly what is going to be coming at them next week. I love what Jacksonville State has been able to do in this later part of the year. They lost their first 3 games to start this season, and luckily, all of them were out-of-conference games. So then when they rattled off 7 straight wins, they were all conference victories. And it got them to the point of clinching a spot before the season was over. And then they took on Western Kentucky. Yes, they lost, but they still find themselves in the championship game. And I've got a feeling that Jacksonville State is going to get the win this time around. Now on to our 3rd conference championship game in the group of 5, and it is the Sun Belt. You got Marshall taking on the Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. I'm going to be 100% honest right now. I don't know much about either of these teams. These are 2 teams that somehow I did not catch like a single second of this season. So I'm going to be very transparent here. I'm just going to trust what Vegas says. Give me the Ragin' Cajuns. Now we get to 2 conference championship games that I really like, and we start off with the American Athletic Conference, their championship game between Tulane and number 24 Army. Prior to losing to Memphis last week, Tulane had a genuine shot at capturing that 5th guaranteed bid for a conference champion. They were 17th in the college football playoff rankings last week, and if they would have won, they would have likely jumped ahead of the 2 teams that will be representing the Big 12. It also would have put them ahead of UNLV, meaning that even if UNLV beat Boise State, there was still a chance that Tulane could make it in. But on the other side of this matchup, Army has been a team that was in the conversation all year as well. Up until a couple weeks ago with that loss to Notre Dame, Army was undefeated, and now they sit at 10-1. They still technically have a game to play next week after the selection show and after the bowl game selection. But Army at 10-1 comes into this conference championship game now ranked number 24. Now, they don't really have a chance to make the college football playoff, but Army would still love to capture a victory for their conference because a conference championship is huge for a school like Army. And I gotta say, with this matchup, I love it. I love the matchup, especially of the 2 quarterbacks in this game. Darian Mensah for Tulane has sneakily been a fantastic quarterback this year. He's tossed 20 touchdowns, only has thrown 5 interceptions. And you pair him up with a running back like Mekhi Hughes, They have been making magic all season for Tulane. I've loved what they've been able to do, so you can't sleep on them. You also can't sleep on Army's offense. They've got must-watch football going on, and you can thank triple option genius, triple option master, Bryson Daly. This man has had one game that he has played in this season where he didn't rush for 2 touchdowns, at least. And in that game that he didn't rush for 2 touchdowns, he still had 117 rushing yards, and he went 1 for 4 passing, and that one completion was a 44-yard passing touchdown. These are 2 teams that I've enjoyed watching. I've watched a lot of these 2 teams this season, and I'm going to be honest, I think I have to go with Tulane. I have loved following Army's story, and there is so many great things about it. I just think that what Tulane has to offer on the offensive side and what I've seen them capable of on defense is good enough to beat this Army team. Now on to our final Group of 5 championship game, and it has got some huge playoff implications. It's the Mountain West. Number 20 UNLV taking on number 10 Boise State. I'm going to keep it blunt. You cannot sleep on this game. You have to watch this game on Friday. And it's not for the same reason that I've been telling you guys to watch Boise State every week. It's not just because of Ashton Jeanty. It's because UNLV is very much capable of winning this football game and winning this conference and getting themselves a spot in the college football playoff. They were the first team this whole season that we really saw slow down Ashton Jeanty. And not only did they slow down Ashton Jeanty, they slowed down an Ashton Jeanty who was on a generational run at the time. He was still very healthy going into this game. And now we look at the teams that have slowed down Ashton Jeanty in these past couple of weeks in this remaining part of the season, and you realize that Ashton Jeanty has been extremely banged up. He's been extremely hurt for this entire second half of the season, but UNLV stopped him when it seemed like he was at full strength. And I think this version that we've been seeing of Jeanty might not be good enough to beat a team that is capable, and UNLV is very much capable of putting up points, playing pretty solid defense, and winning games. In this matchup in the regular season, UNLV had Boise on the ropes for the entire game. They end up losing by 5, but it was a huge game for both of these teams. So yeah, I definitely think UNLV can pull off this upset. And if they do, they will very likely become that 5th highest ranked conference champion, and they will get the 12 seed in the playoff. My only problem is that Boise State just keeps finding ways to win. It's still, to this point, their only loss was to the number 1, the undefeated Oregon Ducks, and it was by 3 points. Now, this is a very different version of this team. With Ashton Jeanty so banged up at this point, it is not the same team. It's not the same Ashton Jeanty that we saw against Oregon. But they are still fantastic. I'm going to take Boise State to win just because I can't give up on my guys now. I've been rooting for them all year. I got to continue to ride the Boise State train. All right, now on to the big ones, the Power 4 Conference Championship games. We're going to start off with a big one, the Big 12 Championship game. It's win and get in for both of these teams. You got number 16 Iowa State taking on number 15 Arizona State. And I got to be honest, these are 2 teams that if you've been listening all season, you know I kind of like both of them. And I really can't decide who I think's going to win, and I really can't decide who I think I want to win. I have absolutely loved Matt Campbell. I've liked him for quite a few years, but what he's done at Iowa State has been phenomenal. I've really enjoyed watching Rocco Becht at quarterback this season. They've had some fun players at wide receiver as well that have showed up this year. I really like watching this Iowa State team. But I'm also really high on Arizona State. You know I love Cam Scattaboo. He's awesome. Yeah, I was saying his last name wrong for a while, but I did the same thing with Ashton Jeanty for a while. Maybe it's just a thing. My favorite running backs, I can't say their name until somebody tells me how. Cam Scattaboo is awesome. For me, when I'm looking at what these teams' track records look like, how they're coming into this game, Arizona State makes the most sense to me. It's really just off the fact that they're riding great momentum. You go back to these last 3 weeks of the season, they have 2 back-to-back top 25 upsets. Then you cap it off by demolishing your in-state rivals. I love Matt Campbell. I love this team for Iowa State, but I think I'm going to have to go with the Sun Devils here. They are just riding high. Now it's on to one of the biggest matchups of the year, one that we've already seen played once, and it was a huge game. Once again, it will be a huge game, the SEC championship game between number 5 Georgia and number 2 Texas. Last week, we got to witness potentially one of the best college football games in history between Georgia and Georgia Tech. You can't really write off a win against Georgia Tech either because they've been a very good team. They're 7-5. They've been a great team. They upset Miami. They've looked really good against a lot of good teams. So this win for Georgia isn't necessarily bad. It's just not the showing we expected. But if we want to talk about teams not giving us the showing we expected, Texas did the same thing last week in their win over Texas A&M. Sure, they covered the spread by winning by 10 points, but they still left a lot to be desired. 17-7 is not the score you want to see out of a Texas team that was going up against an A&M team that looked horrible. I'm still not impressed by Texas. They left me with a lot to be desired from that win, and it certainly doesn't help a resume who, yes, now their best win of the year is against a number 20 ranked Texas A&M team. But before that, it was Vanderbilt, and it still potentially is. And that was a 3-point victory over Vanderbilt. And I think if UGA comes out and they look strong again, they're going to beat Texas again. I know it is so difficult to beat a team 2 times in the same season, especially in college football, but Georgia has the capabilities. They have shown exactly what it takes to beat this Texas team. They're the only team that's shown what it takes to beat this Texas team, and I believe that they could do it again. I think especially if Georgia comes out hot, they set the pace, Texas won't be able to keep up. Georgia will get another victory, and they will capture the SEC championship. So that's going to be my prediction. I'm taking the Bulldogs. Now we move on to the Big Ten championship. You got number 3, one-loss Penn State, taking on number 1, undefeated Oregon. Penn State just feels lucky to be here at this point. The loss for Ohio State last week was so big for Penn State, especially for their playoff hopes. They get the chance to up their seeding. Penn State gets a chance to do something that most people thought they would never have gotten the chance to do after losing to Ohio State. And now they get a chance to potentially upset the number 1 team in the nation. If they do that, they'll probably move to the number 1 team in the nation. Penn State has an opportunity they did not expect. And now at this point, you really have nothing to lose. If you play a normal game against Oregon and you lose by however many points, you're still going to make the playoffs. But you can keep in mind the fact that you do have a chance to upset them, and it's not definitely out of the cards. Now, when I look at this game, what do I think? Oregon should probably beat the hell out of Penn State. The real question is, will they? Once again, I'd probably say yes, mainly because I think it comes down to James Franklin. Everybody knows around here I have zero trust in James Franklin, and it doesn't help that he's going to be coaching across the field from Dan Lanning's crazy ass and this Oregon team that has just been putting on great display after great display, minus a couple of close victories. I will say on the Penn State side, Drew Aller has happily surprised me this season. I love their running back room. It's just not going to be enough against Oregon. Oregon is obviously led by Dillon Gabriel, who in my eyes is a surefire 3rd place in Heisman voting. And at running back, Jordan James, I don't think I've seen him play an actually bad game. His only game where the numbers didn't look really good was against Maryland, and it's because he got hurt early in the game. I think Oregon's just got what it takes to slowly just continue to chip away at this Penn State team and end up getting a victory in probably commanding fashion. So give me the Ducks to win their first Big Ten title in their first season in the Big Ten. And we'll round it out with the ACC championship. Man, do I wish that Florida State was here? Of course. Obviously, we won 2 games this season, so it was very much out of the cards about 3 weeks into the year. But I wish they were here, and they are not. And instead, we've got number 17 Clemson taking on number 8 SMU. I'm sure by now, if you've watched any episodes of the College Football Show or any Monday episodes of the podcast, you're probably well aware of the fact that I love SMU this year. They have been so much fun to watch. Once they made the move from Preston Stone to Kevin Jennings at quarterback, this team absolutely lifted off the ground. They were unreal after Kevin Jennings stepped in. He wasn't the starter until the 4th game of the season. He still finished the year with over 2,700 passing yards and 19 passing touchdowns. And for SMU, outside of the Duke game where they went to overtime and still got a victory, I haven't really questioned them all that much since this quarterback change. That was the only game where things looked bad, and they turned the ball over a lot in that game, and they still won, regardless of it. The issue is that it's very hard to assess the resumes of these ACC teams because the top 3 teams all really lucked out. They all ended up avoiding each other. SMU, Clemson, and Miami didn't go head-to-head between any of them. And it's really made me question these teams at the top. And that brings me to my side on Clemson. They got to start the year with a bit of an excused loss to Georgia. Then the Louisville game happens and Clemson loses. And once again, they're kind of put into question. Okay, is this team for real? But at that point, it seemed like, oh, they're so on the downturn, they're probably not even going to make the ACC championship game. Well, then they rattled off a couple wins. People kind of looked over that loss to Louisville. And then it came time for them to play South Carolina. And they played it really close. But they lose by 3, 17-14 to South Carolina in rivalry week. But once again, a loss gets overshadowed because they still found their way into the ACC championship game because Miami's losses late in the year. And because Clemson just kept getting things handed to them, I'm still not sure if they really deserve to be here. So I'm going to have to go with the SMU Mustangs to win the ACC championship, meaning that they, as well as Oregon, would be 2 teams that move over in conference realignment and win the championship in their conference in their first season. All right, those are my predictions from all of the conference championship games. Now it's time to see what I think would happen based on the outcomes I predicted. So we're going to talk about my playoff prediction. The way I'm going to seed it is how it will look in the actual playoff. I'm not too worried about the actual rankings. We'll just talk about how it'll be seeded in the playoff. So the number 1 seed getting a bye still remains Oregon. They get the win in the Big Ten Championship. Of course, as the only undefeated team in FBS, they will hold on to their spot. And number 2, I have my SEC champion, which is Georgia. Georgia, they were number 5. They get the win over Texas. And luckily, because they won and Oregon won, that means 2 of the top 5 teams got a loss. And then Notre Dame can't be one of the teams getting a bye. So no matter what, with the Georgia win, they get that 2 seed. Then at number 3, I've got my ACC champion, SMU Mustangs, getting the bye in the first round. Then at number 4, I have Boise State because I have them winning the Mountain West Championship game. They'll be higher ranked than the winner of the Big 12 or any other conferences. So Boise State also gets a first-round bye. At number 5, I've got Texas. I think it'll be a very close loss to Georgia that will look very impressive still for Texas's resume. It'll only be their second loss of the season, and it'll be their second loss to the exact same team. And I think because of that, it could push Notre Dame down. So I have Notre Dame being pushed down to number 6 because obviously they don't play a conference championship game. They can't get one of those top 4 spots. I've got them at 6. They don't play a game this week, so they'll just have to settle with that 1 loss in the season to Northern Illinois, and somehow people still believe in them. And number 7, because I think Oregon's going to win pretty handedly over Penn State, and they don't have the best resume considering they already lost to Ohio State this year, I would have Penn State, now with 2 losses as well, dropping behind Notre Dame. I've got Tennessee coming in at number 8, and most people would naturally think that Ohio State would just kind of stay where they're at and Tennessee would stay where they're at. I think that with Georgia potentially winning the SEC championship game, it makes Tennessee look a little bit better. Of course, they have their unranked loss as well, but so does Ohio State, and I have Ohio State coming in at 9. I think what this comes down to me is strength of schedule and strength of record. I think Tennessee has had so many good victories over good teams in the SEC. Obviously, the win over Alabama is huge for them in the rankings and a number of other good victories. Whereas Ohio State, yes, they have a victory over an Indiana team that nobody necessarily believed in really making a run here. Yes, they'll make the playoff most likely, but nobody really had the belief in them. And then they get a win over a Penn State team who has just been so bad against Ohio State for the longest time. Of course, they got the win, and it was very close. They've also played very close games with other teams like Nebraska. They lost to Michigan now. They don't necessarily jump off the page to me the way that Tennessee does, so I have them dropping to number 9. Then at number 10 is those aforementioned Indiana Hoosiers. They still sneak in despite having the worst resume of any one-loss team, maybe ever, with the 103rd or 106th strength of schedule, whatever that number is that everybody keeps bringing up. That's why Indiana ends up here at number 10. despite just having one loss this year. At number 11, I would love to put Alabama ahead of Indiana, but this is not a power ranking. This is a college football playoff ranking, and a 3-loss Alabama team will never be higher ranked than a 1-loss Indiana team. Alabama does still sneak in. They would be the 3-loss team that makes it in, and a lot of people going into the season thought, once you get 3 losses, maybe you don't have a chance, but we all kind of knew that some of these SEC teams that kind of beat each other up could still get a shot even with 3 losses, and that is exactly what happens for the Crimson Tide. Then my number 12 seed goes to the next highest ranked conference champion, which in the way that I predicted would be Arizona State, which means my first 3 out and the really only 3 that are necessarily in contention for an at-large bid is Miami, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. South Carolina made a heck of a run at potentially making the playoff, but there's no reason why they should be ahead of Ole Miss, considering the head-to-head. And there's no reason South Carolina would be able to jump Alabama because of the head-to-head. South Carolina, unfortunately, dropped to both of these teams. 2 of their 3 losses were to Alabama and Ole Miss, who are ahead of them. And unfortunately, those 2 teams hung on to their positions. And Ole Miss isn't going to get the shot as a 9-3 over Alabama because of the mutual opponents. The biggest one, obviously, being LSU. Alabama absolutely smoked LSU in Death Valley. Meanwhile, Ole Miss took a loss against LSU in overtime, heartbreaking fashion, but a loss nonetheless. And when you compare those 2 games, Alabama clearly has the edge. And then between Alabama and Miami, it seems like Ward Manuel and the College Football Playoff Committee kind of have their minds set. He went on TV and said exactly why Alabama is ahead of Miami, and it comes down to the strength of record like we talked about earlier. Alabama gets the edge because of the teams they've beat and the resume they've put together, whereas Miami just hasn't played as strong of opponents, and with 2 losses, both to unranked teams, it doesn't look great for Miami. And with the way that the rankings look right now, with the Big 12 representatives outside of the playoff picture, and with Boise State all the way up there in the rankings, and so many Big 10 and SEC teams that won't be playing in the championship game in the playoff picture, I don't really see these rankings changing all that much. Obviously, if you look at mine compared to what they have right now, there's not huge shifts. The only real changes come from the conference champions. And then, of course, I just have my opinion of Tennessee over Ohio State and a couple of other things throughout this ranking that could change. But it really just comes down to who wins the conference champions is who's going to move around this week. Now, there are still a few teams that have a chance of making the playoff, that being Clemson and Iowa State, who both are playing in Power 4 conference championship games. UNLV has the chance of upsetting Boise State, and most likely that would make them the 5th highest ranked conference champion. And then maybe Army has a chance because they're ranked right now, but I don't think a win over Tulane would get them over UNLV, because UNLV would also have to win for Army to be in. So Army doesn't really have a chance, but it really just comes down to the College Football Playoff Committee and how their decision-making process works with those 2 different conference championship games. If I had to guess, UNLV will get a pretty strong jump in the rankings anyways if they beat number 10 Boise State rather than Army jumping up for beating an unranked Tulane team. So that is how I have my college football playoff set up after my predictions come true in conference championship week. Obviously, no picks to sign off the show this week, so that is where we will call it. But I want you guys to go down in the comments section right now and tell me, in my playoff prediction, what did I get wrong? What team needs to be higher? What team needs to be lower? Who's not actually going to win a conference championship like I said they would? Who is going to lose their conference championship game that I said they would? Let me know down in the comments. While you're doing it, make sure you hit that subscribe button before you even get there. Turn on those post notifications by clicking the bell, and then make sure you like the video and then leave that comment. After that, follow us on Instagram. Stay up to date with everything we've got going on here at Second and Short, and make sure you're listening to the podcast every Monday and Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And with this being the second to last, the penultimate episode of the college football show for this season, the final one, the final episode of this first ever regular season of the college football show, I just want to thank everybody who has watched even just one episode of this show. I came up with it kind of on a whim, randomly, started it in week 3 of college football, and we just hit the ground running, and I have totally appreciated the support that I've gotten from it. I'm having a blast doing it. Hope you guys are having a blast watching it. And I am very excited for what is to come with this first ever 12-team playoff. So be on the lookout for our college football playoff special episode. It's going to be coming in the next couple of weeks. And of course, make sure that you're checking everything that we've got going on here at Second and Short. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the football. Enjoy the conference championships. I will see you guys on Monday on the podcast so you can hear me and Colin's reactions to all the selection show and as well NFL Week 14 if you're interested. So I'll see you then. But for now, I'll catch you guys later. Peace.